Early on a Sunday morning, October 28th, Derek made a frantic call to 911. His voice was strained as he claimed his wife was unresponsive and that he was desperately trying to perform CPR. But when the dispatcher pressed for details, what had happened, what had led to this moment, Derek's answers were vague, disjointed, and strangely lacking in specifics. Paramedics rushed to the scene within minutes, but unfortunately, there was nothing they could do. When police arrived to assess the situation, something about the scene immediately set off alarm bells. Something was not right. The atmosphere was tense, so much so that officers almost immediately called in homicide detectives. What investigators found inside the home painted a dark and chaotic picture, one that pointed not to a tragic accident, but to something far more sinister. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Kim Dorsey was born on October 10, 1974, in Jacksonville, Florida, to Dennis Dunn and Sally Ann Barrett Dunn. From the very beginning, Kim stood out, not only for her intelligence, but also for her sense of determination and quiet strength. She grew up in a loving home where achievement was encouraged, but humility was valued just as much. Friends and family recall a child with both grit and grace, someone who could recite multiplication tables with ease, but also wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty fixing a broken bicycle chain. Her classmates remember her not only as a straight A student, but as someone who offered help without being asked. She was the kind of student who volunteered to tutor peers after school, yet still made time for extracurriculars. Teachers described her as unusually mature for her age, focused and self-driven. Weekends often found the Dunn family volunteering at Dogwood Park, where Kim developed her love for animals and her community. Those volunteer days weren't just about walking dogs or cleaning up trails. They were family bonding experiences rooted in kindness and giving back. Her early success in academics and her tireless curiosity hinted at the path she would one day pursue. By the mid-1990s, Kim had her sights set on a career in engineering, an ambitious goal at a time when women were still underrepresented in the field. She enrolled at the University of North Florida, where she pursued a degree in civil engineering with an unwavering focus. Kim's university years were a blur of late-night study sessions, internships, and student leadership. She became an early and active member of the Women in Construction Club, advocating for more inclusive practices in the building trades. Her professors noted her fascination with Florida's building codes, particularly those related to hurricane resilience, a subject that resonated deeply in a state constantly under threat from nature's fury. After graduation, Kim didn't just stop at earning a diploma. She sat for Florida's rigorous state licensing exam and proudly earned her certified general contractor license, a major milestone that underscored her capability and commitment. But even that wasn't enough for someone like Kim. In her late 20s, she founded a boutique construction firm that focused on environmentally responsible and storm-resistant building practices. She quickly built a reputation for excellence and was soon appointed director of training, where she taught city inspectors how to assess structural vulnerabilities and strengthen buildings in preparation for hurricane season. Kim's professional life was full of hard hats, high-pressure deadlines, and site walkthroughs, but she managed to balance it all with a vibrant personal life. Around the year 2000, she met Derek Dorsey, a Jacksonville firefighter and paramedic. Friends and colleagues say the chemistry between them was instant, sparked by a shared love of classic muscle cars, spontaneous road trips, and a deep compassion for animals. Derek, known for his calm under pressure and dedication to public service, matched Kim's energy in all the right ways. They bonded over their mutual desire to help others, whether it was rescuing dogs or volunteering at local shelters. After dating for a couple of years, Kim and Derek married and purchased a cozy, well-kept brick home on Eastbury Drive in Jacksonville's South Side. To neighbors, the Dorseys seemed like the perfect couple. They hosted annual 4th of July barbecues, lent tools to anyone who needed them, and were always quick with a friendly wave or a helping hand. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic, a well-matched couple with rewarding careers and a strong sense of community. But behind the cheerful exterior, there were some quiet struggles. According to Derek, Kim battled periods of depression. Friends recall that she sometimes mentioned trouble sleeping and gaining weight that wouldn't budge, though she rarely let on how much it truly bothered her. She spoke about it with a wry sense of humor, making light of the symptoms even while she sought professional treatment. Despite the emotional weight, she never missed a training session, a site visit, or a charity event. Kim approached mental health with the same grit she applied to everything else, head-on and without self-pity. By October 2012, things seemed to have finally settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kim had just wrapped up the rollout of a new training program. Derek had recently switched to 24-hour shifts at the fire station, and the couple had made tentative plans to spend a quiet weekend at the beach once hurricane season had passed. Life, it seemed, was on an upswing. Then came the weekend that changed everything. On the morning of Saturday, October 27, 2012, Derek kissed Kim goodbye around 7 a.m. before heading off for a long shift. It was routine. Nothing seemed out of place. When he returned home the following morning, on Sunday, October 28th, shortly after 8 a.m., he expected to find Kim still in bed. Their bedroom had thick blackout curtains, so it was nearly pitch dark. But what he found inside that room wasn't just unexpected, it was devastating. Derek immediately called 911, reporting that his wife was unresponsive and that he was administering CPR. When asked by the dispatcher what had happened, his answer was vague and non-specific. Emergency services arrived quickly, but it was already too late. Police officers at the scene began assessing the situation immediately, and what they saw raised red flags. The bedroom showed signs that this had not been a natural death. Homicide detectives were called in. Early estimates from the medical examiner revealed that Kim had died roughly 24 hours before the 911 call. Around the same time Derek had left for work the previous morning. The crime scene told a chaotic and chilling story. In the kitchen, more strange clues emerged. Drawers had been yanked open and their contents dumped out. Remote controls and a keypad for a surround sound system were inexplicably piled in the sink. It looked as though someone had been searching for something. Maybe valuables, or maybe something else. And while the front door showed no signs of forced entry, there was an odd detail that caught the detective's attention. A ceramic dog statue that usually stood upright by the entrance had been knocked over. It was subtle, but enough to suggest movement or a hurried exit. Police quickly came to a working theory. This wasn't a random break-in. The absence of forced entry suggested that Kim either let her attacker in willingly, or that the person had access to the house already. Given the circumstances surrounding Kim Dorsey's tragic death, it was hardly unexpected that her husband, Derek Dorsey, became the first person detectives turned to. As the last person known to have seen Kim alive, and the one who discovered her, his timeline, actions, and relationship with his wife came under immediate scrutiny. He was brought to the Jacksonville Police Department for formal questioning shortly after the initial investigation began. Detectives approached the interview methodically, aiming to understand Derek's movements and behavior over the course of the weekend in question. He was calm, cooperative, and appeared open to sharing information. When asked to recount the days leading up to the incident, Derek provided a seemingly straightforward account. On Friday, Kim had left the house for a few hours to run errands, which included a shopping trip. That evening, they stayed in, ordered food, and watched a movie together. A quiet, uneventful night by his description. Derek explained that he had to work a 24-hour shift beginning early Saturday morning. He left the house around 7 a.m. and drove to his assigned fire station, located on the northern outskirts of the county. The station was approximately 15 miles from their home, and while not remote, the area was known for spotty mobile phone reception. He claimed to have tried contacting Kim several times throughout the day, but his calls either failed to go through or were dropped mid-connection. He wrapped up his shift by 8 a.m. Sunday and drove straight home, only to discover what he described as a devastating and surreal scene. At first glance, Derek's account appeared to match the basic facts available to detectives. His story aligned with his work schedule, and initial timelines didn't present any glaring inconsistencies. However, there was one detail that detectives found puzzling. Derek, a seasoned emergency responder with years of field experience, had spoken in a disoriented and almost incoherent manner during the 911 call. It struck investigators as odd that someone so trained in crisis situations would react in such a scattered way. This discrepancy raised questions. Was it emotional distress? Was he hiding something? Or was he possibly involved in some way? As the interview progressed, detectives steered the conversation toward his marriage. Derek described his relationship with Kim as unconventional but consensual. According to him, they had agreed years earlier to maintain a form of open relationship, allowing both partners to explore connections outside of their marriage. However, he said Kim had stepped away from that lifestyle after suffering the loss of her mother, which occurred roughly 3 to 4 years prior. He explained that Kim had taken the loss very hard, which led her to seek mental health support. As part of her treatment, she began taking prescribed medication that, while effective, came with side effects, including weight gain. Derek noted that these changes may have affected how Kim saw herself, though she continued to function in her career and daily life with characteristic discipline. While Kim had reportedly ended her involvement with others, detectives needed to know whether Derek had done the same. In many investigations, strained relationships or romantic entanglements become crucial threads. Derek admitted he was currently seeing another woman. This raised natural questions. Had he fallen in love with someone else? Did he want out of the marriage? Was there any potential financial motive? When detectives asked if Kim had a life insurance policy, Derek replied that she did not. That removed one possible incentive, but the inquiry didn't end there. Detectives evaluated Derek's alibi more closely. The travel time from his fire station to the house was roughly 30 minutes each way, meaning a round trip would take close to an hour. They questioned his fellow firefighters, all of whom confirmed that Derek had been present at the station throughout the entirety of his shift. The firehouse was small, the kind where comings and goings are hard to miss. Their accounts matched his own, confirming that Derek had what investigators often refer to as an airtight alibi. This discovery forced detectives to broaden their focus. Still, suspicion lingered. Love triangles, jealousy, and broken promises have long played a role in domestic tragedies. Investigators considered whether Derek's girlfriend might have had a motive, perhaps fueled by resentment or an unfulfilled promise of divorce. But after a thorough interview and review of her whereabouts, she too was cleared of suspicion. She had a solid alibi for the time frame in question. With both Derek and his girlfriend effectively ruled out, detectives returned to the Dorsey residence for a fresh examination of the crime scene. Sometimes, a second pass can reveal things that were overlooked in the initial wave of activity. This time, they brought in behavioral analysts and forensic experts to help reconstruct the sequence of events. These specialists offered new perspectives. Their task was to determine the point of origin, the moment the confrontation began. According to their findings, the altercation likely started upstairs, where a pool sticks normally kept in a storage rack had been taken and used. The knife, later recovered from the kitchen, was part of a match set located in a drawer that wasn't in plain view. These details strongly suggested that the perpetrator wasn't a stranger. This was someone familiar with the home's layout, someone who either lived there at some point or spent enough time in the house to know where things were stored. That alone shifted the direction of the investigation. If the person responsible had intimate knowledge of the home, then it was highly likely that they had a personal connection to the Dorsey family. More tellingly, investigators had already recovered a DNA sample from the scene that they believed belonged to the assailant. Now they needed to match that sample against known individuals who had been inside the home. Detectives pressed Derek for names. Who had stayed in their home before? Who had access to the property when he wasn't there? It turned out that Derek, aside from being a firefighter, also worked as a general contractor and often employed day laborers and subcontractors. Some of these workers, particularly during hard times, had even stayed at the Dorsey residence temporarily. As detectives dug deeper into the growing web of people who had once passed through the Dorsey household, one name repeatedly resurfaced: Lance Kirkpatrick. Derek Dorsey reported that Lance was someone he had once worked with on various contracting jobs. Over time, the two developed what Derek described as a casual friendship, born more out of shared labor than personal closeness. But when Lance hit a rough patch, Derek did what he had done for others in the past. He extended a helping hand. Wanting to offer stability to someone struggling, Derek allowed Lance to live in his home for several months. At first, things were amicable. Lance was quiet, respectful, and helped out with small repairs and errands. But that arrangement began to deteriorate when Lance reportedly started drinking more heavily. According to Derek, the shift in Lance's behavior became noticeable. He was no longer the subdued houseguest, but someone who brought tension into the home. Eventually, things reached a point where Derek had to ask him to leave. Derek claimed the decision wasn't made lightly, but Kim had grown increasingly uncomfortable, and their peaceful home life had begun to fray. When investigators asked where Lance had been the weekend, Derek said that, as far as he knew, Lance had been out on a boat in the Atlantic Ocean, far from Jacksonville, and presumably with no access to a vehicle or way to return. This alibi, while difficult to verify immediately, gave detectives pause. It was vague and lacked a concrete location or witness confirmation. Still, without solid evidence placing him at the crime scene, they had to keep moving. The second individual Derek mentioned was someone named Joshua V., another man he had taken under his wing during his side work as a general contractor. Much like with Lance, Derek offered Joshua both employment and temporary housing. Joshua lived in their home for a time, though the arrangement eventually fell apart due to disagreements, likely personality clashes or differing expectations. While Joshua moved out, Derek continued to offer him occasional work doing small jobs or manual labor. According to Derek, he had plans to meet Joshua on the morning of Kim's death. In fact, Derek explained that after wrapping up his 24-hour shift at the fire station on Sunday morning, he was supposed to meet Joshua at a local convenience store. They had arranged to connect there so Joshua could join him on a new work project. But Joshua never showed up. That detail raised a red flag for investigators. If Joshua was eager for employment and needed the income, why would he fail to appear at a scheduled meeting with someone offering him a job? Now, under heightened suspicion, Joshua V. was located and brought in for questioning. During the interview, detectives pressed him about his whereabouts over the weekend. Joshua claimed he had spent the entire time partying at his home with friends, adding that he hadn't left his house during the hours the crime occurred. The detectives then shifted gears and asked whether he had ever been romantically involved with Kim Dorsey. Joshua denied any such relationship. His answers were relatively straightforward, until detectives reported that Kim had died. At that moment, Joshua's demeanor changed dramatically. He began crying, visibly upset, seemingly overwhelmed. But the detectives were experienced and cautious. Emotional outbursts, especially when a suspect is told of a death, can be either authentic or performative. Was this guilt, shock, or an attempt to appear sympathetic? Regardless, protocol required a DNA sample, which Joshua provided voluntarily. When the forensic analysis came back, it conclusively showed that Joshua V.'s DNA did not match the sample recovered from the scene. That eliminated him as a suspect and brought the police no closer to solving Kim Dorsey's murder. Determined not to overlook any possibility, detectives returned to Derek Dorsey and requested a full list of every person who had stayed at or spent significant time in the Dorsey household in recent years. This process was extensive. Names were cross-checked, interviews were conducted, and DNA samples were collected and tested. One by one, all were ruled out. Either their alibis were verified, or their DNA failed to match the forensic evidence. Still searching for clarity, the investigative team decided to revisit the crime scene with Derek himself in tow. Walking through the house with someone who knows its layout can yield subtle but critical insights. As they moved through the kitchen, Derek pointed out the strangest part of the scene. 4 remote controls, part of the home's surround sound system, had been tossed into the sink. The remotes had been soaked, likely damaged beyond repair. To seasoned detectives, this was not a random act. It looked calculated. Whoever did this may have been trying to erase fingerprints or DNA, thinking the water might destroy forensic evidence. That level of precaution hinted that the intruder was familiar not just with the house, but with what could be used against them in an investigation. Even more intriguing, when Derek turned on the TV during the walkthrough, a movie began playing, a title he swore he had never watched. This sparked a chilling possibility. Had the person responsible lingered in the house after committing the crime? Could they have calmly watched a movie in the living room, perhaps to regroup or wait for the right moment to leave? That recollection triggered another memory in Derek's mind. On Friday afternoon, just about 12 hours before Kim's estimated time of death, a technician had visited the home to fix ongoing issues with their entertainment system. There had been problems with the remote controls, and Derek had called the company to schedule a service call. The technician came, completed the repairs, and left. But could he have returned? Investigators quickly tracked down the technician. During the interview, they noticed that he had visible cuts on his hands. When asked, he said the injuries were work-related, typical for someone dealing with wires, tools, and sharp corners on a daily basis. He denied any involvement in the crime and was cooperative with the process, even agreeing to a DNA swab. When results came back, his DNA did not match what had been found at the Dorsey home. The case seemed to stall, until a routine police database search turned up a highly relevant report, a vehicle-related complaint classified as temporary authorized use. That's legal terminology for a very specific situation, where someone is given permission to use a car, but then fails to return it as agreed. The report had been filed just 17 hours before Kim's death. The complainant? A young woman. The person she had let borrow her vehicle? Lance Kirkpatrick. Lance had told Derek he would be out on a boat that weekend, but the police report painted a very different picture. The woman who filed the complaint said that she, Lance, and a few others were at a party on Friday night. Sometime during the evening, Lance offered to go out and get drinks. She allowed him to use her car, a decision she would soon regret, because he never came back. This bombshell reopened the case in a whole new light. Lance's ocean alibi now looked increasingly unreliable. Detectives shifted focus. The next logical question: did that car, the one Lance was last seen driving, ever travel near Kim Dorsey's home? When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, their responsibilities extended far beyond securing the area and collecting physical evidence. One of the most vital components of any investigation, especially one involving a potential homicide, is speaking with those who might have seen or heard something suspicious. So, as part of their early procedural steps, the patrol officers began canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on doors, spoke to residents, and asked a range of questions. Had anyone seen an unfamiliar car? A stranger walking around? Any sounds or disruptions? One neighbor, living just a few houses down from the Dorseys, told an officer that he had noticed a small blue SUV parked outside the Dorsey home on the morning of the incident. The vehicle had caught his attention, not because of any overtly alarming behavior, but simply because it wasn't one of the usual cars seen on that quiet suburban street. The description matched the exact make and color of the vehicle Lance Kirkpatrick had been seen driving, and which, according to a recent report, had been taken without being returned from a party the night before. A few days later, investigators received a critical tip that dramatically narrowed their focus. Surveillance footage had been recovered from a home security system just down the street from the Dorsey residence. The timestamp on the footage was chilling. At approximately 6:30 a.m., on the day Kim Dorsey lost her life, the small blue SUV was clearly visible, parked directly in front of her house. The car remained there for a short while before vanishing from the frame. This visual evidence was the missing puzzle piece. Once confirmed, Lance Kirkpatrick was no longer just a person of interest. He became the primary suspect. To locate him, detectives reached back out to the woman who had originally loaned the vehicle to Lance at the Friday night party. She explained that after Lance left with the vehicle, she hadn't seen him again and had no idea where he might be. However, she did provide another valuable lead, a friend of Lance's named Brian Kafir. She believed Brian might know where Lance had gone after the party. Investigators wasted no time. Brian was picked up for questioning and brought to the precinct for a formal interview. At first, Brian appeared cooperative. He explained that he had also been at the same party where the SUV had disappeared. When asked about his involvement, Brian was quick to clarify that he wasn't the one who had driven off with the vehicle, but he was concerned when Lance disappeared. In fact, he said he'd spent most of the night riding around in a taxi trying to track Lance down. He said he hadn't been successful until the following day. When he finally found Lance, he said he looked worn out, disheveled. He had a noticeable wound on one of his arms. But it wasn't just Lance's physical state that disturbed Brian. It was what he said next. According to Brian, Lance confessed in vague but deeply disturbing terms. He reportedly told Brian something along the lines of, "I'm going to jail." He didn't elaborate much at first, but then began to mention things only someone directly involved would know. Details that hadn't yet been released publicly and would have been impossible for someone on the outside to fabricate. His tone was flat, not dramatic. This wasn't a boast. It was more like a resigned acknowledgement. Brian said that while he was stunned by what he was hearing, he didn't know what to do in the moment. He hadn't initially gone to the police, unsure of what was true, and what might have been alcohol-fueled exaggeration. Detectives knew that confessions can come from many places. Sometimes guilt overpowers a person's need for secrecy. Other times, substances such as alcohol loosen tongues. But Brian's account was serious enough to warrant immediate action. At this point, there were two possibilities. Either Lance Kirkpatrick was the perpetrator, or Brian Kiefer knew more than he was admitting, possibly implicating himself. But then Brian provided something unexpected. He told detectives that Lance was hiding in the attic of his house. That single admission changed everything. Officers moved quickly. A team was dispatched to Brian's home. There, hiding in a cramped, dusty attic space, they found Lance Kirkpatrick. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed eerily calm, as if he had already accepted that his freedom was over. Back at the station, Lance was placed in an interview room and questioned about his relationship with the Dorsey family. He admitted that he had known Derek Dorsey for quite some time. They had worked together in construction, and he had even lived at the Dorsey home for a period during a difficult chapter in his life. That arrangement gave him insight into the family's habits, including the layout of the home and Derek's rotating firefighter schedule. Lance confirmed he knew Derek would not be home that Saturday. He would be on a 24-hour shift. That meant Kim would be home alone. When asked directly about his relationship with Kim, Lance maintained that there were never any problems between them. But before investigators could dig deeper, Lance requested an attorney. The interview came to an abrupt halt. With no verbal confession and no cooperation, detectives were forced to rely entirely on forensic evidence. This is where technology and science stepped in. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from Lance's father and compared it to the DNA collected at the crime scene. The results were definitive. The familial DNA match left no room for doubt. Lance Kirkpatrick's genetic profile matched the biological material recovered from Kim Dorsey's home. This not only confirmed his presence at the scene, but it also definitively ruled out Brian Kiefer, whose name could now be cleared. Piecing together everything they had learned, detectives believed Lance had been strategic and premeditated in his actions. The timeline was damning. After leaving the party on Friday night with the borrowed vehicle, he disappeared until the following day. Surveillance showed him near Kim Dorsey's home early that morning. He knew where the spare key was hidden, beneath a decorative ceramic dog statue by the front entrance. He knew the Dorseys well enough to anticipate their routines. He let himself in quietly, but it's believed Kim heard or sensed his presence. What followed inside the house remains partially unknown, locked behind silence. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Lance Kirkpatrick initially pleaded not guilty. He refused to admit responsibility in the early stages of the legal process. But nearly 2 years after Kim's death, as the case approached trial, he reversed course. Lance ultimately admitted to causing Kim's death but claimed it had not been intentional. His version of events portrayed the incident as a tragic accident that unfolded in a heated moment. He insisted he had not come to harm Kim and that things had escalated in ways he hadn't foreseen. During trial proceedings, Lance painted a picture of himself as a close friend of the Dorseys. He said that Kim had even helped train him in fitness. They reportedly went to the gym together multiple times a week and occasionally had drinks afterward. He described their relationship as friendly, casual, and based on mutual support. However, under cross-examination, these comments only raised more questions than answers. Notably, he admitted that the DVD found playing in the Dorsey home's entertainment system belonged to him. That piece of evidence, initially baffling, now made sense. Investigators believed he had stayed inside the house after the crime, possibly watching the film, possibly trying to decide what to do next. As for why he didn't call 911, Lance claimed he panicked. He said he was overwhelmed, frightened, and unsure of what to do. Instead of seeking help, he fled the scene, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would eventually bring him to justice. I was frantic. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, Kirkpatrick told the court, his voice low and unsteady. I just sat and was waiting for the police. His words, while simple, were delivered with a visible mix of anxiety and weariness. To some, He sounded remorseful. To others, evasive. The courtroom, already heavy with emotion, grew quieter still. But it was the cross-examination that truly tested Kirkpatrick's account. The prosecuting attorney, determined to hold him accountable in the eyes of the jury, began pressing him hard. Piece by piece, the state sought to highlight contradictions in Kirkpatrick's testimony, pointing out inconsistencies between what he had told detectives and what he was now telling the court. At times, Kirkpatrick appeared confused, at others, defensive. His responses lacked clarity, and as the prosecution weaved through the facts of the case, his stolen vehicle access, his prior knowledge of Derek Dorsey's schedule, the hidden key, the damaged remotes, and the DVD he admitted was his, it became harder for the jury to ignore the growing list of unsettling truths. Then came the final piercing question. What punishment do you think you deserve for what happened to Kim Dorsey? For a long moment, there was silence. All eyes turned toward the witness stand. Kirkpatrick, now visibly affected, looked down before responding. "I'm guilty," he said softly, voice cracking. "I don't know what I want right now." His answer was both an admission and a deflection. While acknowledging his guilt, he still avoided stating what he believed justice should look like. It was a moment that encapsulated much of the trial. Layers of emotional ambiguity, personal failure, and irreversible loss. Following days of deliberations and testimony, the jury returned with their sentencing recommendation in May 2015. Though the prosecution had pursued the death penalty, the jury ultimately opted for mercy over capital punishment. They recommended 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge accepted their recommendation, and Lance Kirkpatrick was officially sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Following the sentencing, Kim's husband, Derek Dorsey, stood to speak, his expression strained and tearful. "Kim Dorsey was so much more than a firefighter's wife," he said. "She was my partner, my best friend, and the strongest person I've ever known.